so glad you found your way here tonight. Your body is already responding to this quiet moment, slowing down, releasing, beginning to let go. You'll discover how stress quietly shapes every cell in your body and understand why learning to rest is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. Welcome to Sleepy Mind Science. Wherever you are right now, perhaps feeling the weight of the day still sitting on your chest, or noticing your thoughts moving just a little too fast, allow yourself to settle into this moment. We'll journey through 100 science facts about stress. From the first signal your brain fires when something feels threatening, to the quiet chemistry of calm, to the extraordinary way your body already knows how to heal.
This thoughtful journey through the science of stress builds bridges between searching minds. A gentle subscribe, like, or sharing your thoughts creates a pathway for more tired souls to discover this space and brings us closer to protecting it, one sleepy soul at a time. Your presence here matters more than you know. Let yourself settle completely here. Feel your jaw unclench, your breath deepen naturally. You can let these thoughts drift past without holding them. Sense that soothing heaviness enveloping you, like your mind slowly dimming its brightness. Thoughts dissolving into the peaceful fog of approaching sleep, safe and undisturbed. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're floating where the nervous system finally releases its watch. Let your mind dissolve with the quiet. And now, we begin. Stress is one of the oldest survival systems in the human body. Long before language, before cities, before memory as we know it, the nervous system developed a single essential capability: the ability to detect threat and respond. This response, what scientists call the stress response, is not a flaw in design. It is the design. When your brain perceives something as dangerous, a cascade of signals fires through your body in a fraction of a second, preparing every major system to either fight, flee, or freeze. Your heart rate rises, your muscles tighten, your vision narrows. In that moment, your body is doing exactly what billions of years of evolution shaped it to do. The stress response is not your enemy. It is your oldest ally, simply living in a world it wasn't quite built for. The stress response begins in a small almond-shaped structure deep inside the brain, called the amygdala. When the amygdala detects a potential threat, whether a physical danger or an emotional one, it sends an emergency signal to the hypothalamus, which acts as the brain's command center. The hypothalamus then activates the autonomic nervous system, triggering the body-wide changes we associate with stress. This entire process happens faster than conscious thought. By the time you are aware that something has frightened you, your body has already begun to respond. The amygdala does not wait for logic. It acts first and asks questions later. In many ways, your stress response is always a fraction of a second ahead of your thinking mind, a guardian that never fully sleeps. The two main branches of the stress response system work in sequence. The first is the sympathetic nervous system, which delivers the immediate alarm. Within seconds of perceiving threat, the adrenal glands release a surge of adrenaline, also called epinephrine, into the bloodstream. This hormone speeds the heart, opens the airways, and redirects blood away from digestion, toward the large muscles. It is a chemical signal. Move now, think later. The second branch involves a slightly slower hormonal signal through what scientists call the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This system releases cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol sustains the response, keeping you alert, focused, and immobilized for as long as the threat seems to last. Together, these two systems have kept humans alive for a very long time. Cortisol is often described simply as the stress hormone, but that description barely scratches the surface of what it actually does. Cortisol is produced in the outer layer of the adrenal glands, which sit just above the kidneys. It belongs to a class of hormones called glucocorticoids, and its influence reaches nearly every tissue in the body. In a moment of stress, cortisol raises blood sugar to give muscles fuel. It suppresses non-essential functions, digestion, reproduction, immune responses that aren't immediately needed. It sharpens memory formation around the stressful event, and perhaps most intriguingly, cortisol follows a natural daily rhythm, even in the absence of stress. It peaks in the early morning, helping to rouse you from sleep. It falls gradually through the day. Cortisol is not merely a crisis chemical. It is a clock, a regulator, and a messenger woven deeply into the rhythm of being alive. In the short term, the stress response is genuinely protective. Studies of people who experienced acute, time-limited stress, things like a difficult exam, a demanding performance, a brief physical challenge, show measurable benefits. Short-term stress increases alertness, improves working memory performance, and temporarily enhances immune function. Researchers have found that acute stress can trigger the release of chemicals in the brain that promote neuroplasticity, the ability of neurons to form new connections. There is even evidence that brief, manageable stress can act as a form of psychological toughening, building resilience over time. The problem is not stress itself. The problem is stress that never ends, a system designed for short bursts, running continuously in a world that offers no clear moment of safety. The body knows how to recover from a sprint. It was not designed to sprint forever. Chronic stress, stress that persists for weeks, months, or years, tells a very different story in the body. When cortisol levels remain elevated for extended periods, the protective effects of the stress response begin to reverse. The immune system, initially enhanced by short-term stress, gradually becomes less effective over time. Cardiovascular strain accumulates. The digestive system, long told it is not a priority, begins to falter. Perhaps most significantly, the brain itself begins to change. Prolonged high cortisol has been linked to measurable changes in the hippocampus, the part of the brain most responsible for memory and learning. Chronic stress does not simply feel bad, it leaves a physical record in the body, a quiet archive of everything the nervous system was asked to carry and could not set down. The difference between stress that passes and stress that accumulates often comes down to something researchers call perceived control. Studies going back several decades and confirmed repeatedly in more recent neuroimaging research show that when a person believes they have some agency over a stressful situation, even if that control is modest or incomplete, the stress response is measurably different. Cortisol still rises, but more briefly. The amygdala still fires, but the prefrontal cortex, the brain region associated with planning and emotional regulation, engages more quickly to calm it. Conversely, when a person feels entirely without control, the stress response tends to be more intense and more prolonged. Perceived control is not simply a matter of thinking positively. It is a biological moderator of how deeply stress writes itself into the body. The body's ability to return to baseline after stress is called allostasis, a term that describes the active process of achieving stability through change. After a threat has passed, the parasympathetic nervous system gradually takes over from the sympathetic system. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, digestion resumes, cortisol levels begin to form. This recovery process has its own elegance. The brain actively signals the adrenal glands to reduce cortisol output through a feedback loop involving the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. In healthy stress regulation, the system that turns stress on also contains the machinery to turn it off. Allostasis is the nervous system returning to its natural resting state, not because the threat has been solved, but because the body has decided, for now, it is safe to rest. Sleep and stress are bound together in a relationship that goes far deeper than most people realize. During sleep, and particularly during slow-wave deep sleep, the brain actively processes emotional memories associated with stress. Research shows that the amygdala's response to threatening stimuli is dampened after a full night of sleep compared to sleep deprivation. The hippocampus consolidates the factual content of stressful experiences, while sleep seems to help strip away some of their emotional charge. In other words, sleep is not simply a pause from stress. Sleep is one of the body's primary mechanisms for metabolizing stress, converting raw experience into something the nervous system can carry more lightly. Every time you sleep, you are quietly doing the work of recovery. There is a biological reason why chronic stress and insomnia so often appear together, and that reason is cortisol. In a well-regulated nervous system, cortisol follows a predictable arc: high in the morning, low at night. This low nighttime cortisol is part of what allows the brain to initiate sleep. But in chronic stress, this rhythm becomes disrupted. Cortisol levels that should be falling by evening remain elevated, keeping the nervous system in a state of low-grade alertness that resists sleep. The brain, in effect, cannot tell whether the threat has passed. It remains on watch. And watchkeeping and deep sleep cannot coexist. So yes, the biology of stress is also the biology of sleeplessness, two systems entangled in a way that only rest, time, and gentle recovery can begin to untangle. The connection between the brain and the gut during stress is more direct than scientists once thought. The gut contains an estimated 500 million neurons, a vast neural network embedded from the esophagus to the rectum, sometimes called the second brain. This enteric nervous system communicates with the brain primarily through the vagus nerve, and the conversation runs in both directions. During stress, blood flow to the digestive system is reduced, the gut's muscle activity becomes disorganized, and the balance of microbial life in the intestines shifts. The gut also produces roughly 90% of the body's serotonin. Stress touches the gut, and the gut, in turn, shapes how the brain feels. One of the most fascinating aspects of human stress is that it can be triggered by imagination alone. Unlike most animals, humans can generate a full stress response simply by thinking about something threatening, a difficult conversation that hasn't happened yet, a worry about the future, a memory of something painful from the past. The The brain structures responsible for the stress response do not clearly distinguish between a real threat and a vividly imagined one. The amygdala responds to the mental image with nearly the same urgency as it would respond to actual danger. This is both a vulnerability and, in a different context, a gift. The same imaginative capacity that creates unnecessary stress also allows humans to rehearse, prepare, and plan. The brain that worries is the same brain that solves. The cardiovascular system carries some of the most measurable effects of chronic stress. When the stress response activates, the heart beats faster and harder, blood vessels constrict, and blood pressure rises. In short-term stress, this is functional and reversible. In chronic stress, the repeated strain on blood vessel walls contributes to inflammation, arterial stiffness, and over time, increased cardiovascular risk. Research published in recent years has linked high allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear of chronic stress on the body, to significantly higher rates of cardiovascular events. The heart is a remarkably durable organ, but it was not designed to be in a state of emergency continuously. The relationship between stress and heart health is not metaphorical. It is molecular, measurable, and real. Stress affects the immune system through a pathway that is both elegant and somewhat counterintuitive. In the immediate term, acute stress activates certain branches of the immune system, directing immune cells toward tissues most likely to be injured in a physical threat: skin, lymph nodes, blood. This makes biological sense. If a wound is coming, the body prepares. But as stress becomes chronic, the initial immune response gives way to a different pattern. Cortisol, which in short bursts helps regulate unnecessary immune activity, begins to lose its effectiveness over time as immune cells develop what scientists call glucocorticoid receptor resistance. Inflammatory processes are allowed to continue beyond what the body originally intended. Chronic stress-related inflammation has been linked in recent research to a wide range of conditions, from depression to diabetes to certain autoimmune diseases. The immune system and the stress system are not separate. They share molecular territory. The brain region most sensitive to the long-term effects of stress is the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped structure, tucked into the inner fold of each temporal lobe, is essential for forming new memories, navigating space, and regulating emotional responses. The hippocampus is also unusually rich in cortisol receptors, which means it is acutely affected by prolonged cortisol exposure. Imaging studies have shown that people who have experienced chronic stress or trauma have, on average, measurably reduced hippocampus volume compared to those who have not. This has functional consequences: reduced ability to form new memories, impaired capacity to distinguish past threats from present safety, difficulty in emotional regulation. The good news, and it is genuinely good news, is that the hippocampus is also one of the most neuroplastic regions in the adult brain. With the right conditions, including sleep, exercise, and reduced cortisol, it can recover. Not all stress is equal, and the human body has developed different physiological signatures for different kinds of threat. Researchers distinguish between threat stress, where the challenges feel greater than one's resources, and challenge stress, where the demands feel demanding but manageable. In threat stress, the cardiovascular system constricts, blood flow to the periphery decreases, and the body mobilizes for defense. In challenge stress, the the cardiovascular response is more efficient. The heart pumps harder, but blood vessels dilate rather than constrict, allowing for greater output with less strain. This distinction matters considerably because the subjective experience of both can feel very similar. The rapid heartbeat, the heightened awareness, but their biological signatures and their long-term consequences are quite different. How a person interprets their stress may shape, at a physiological level, what that stress actually does to them. There is a class of compounds produced during stress that many people have never heard of, called neuropeptides. These small protein-like molecules serve as messengers between the nervous system and the immune system, helping to coordinate the body's response to threat. One of the most studied is neuropeptide Y, which is released during intense stress and appears to promote resilience, dampening the fear response and helping the brain return to equilibrium after danger has passed. People with higher natural levels of neuropeptide Y tend to show more rapid emotional recovery from stressful events. Another neuropeptide, called substance P, contributes to pain sensitivity and inflammatory signaling during stress. The chemistry of stress is not a simple two-hormone story. It is a rich, layered conversation, dozens of molecular voices speaking at once, each with its own nuance, its own tempo. Stress has a distinctly social dimension that shapes how the nervous system responds. Human beings evolved as deeply social creatures, and the threat of social disconnection, rejection, exclusion, or the absence of trusted others activates many of the same neural circuits as physical danger. Neuroimaging studies have shown that social pain and physical pain share overlapping processing regions in the brain, particularly in the anterior cingulate cortex. Conversely, social connection is one of the most reliable buffers against the physiological effects of stress. The presence of a trusted person, even simply being in proximity to someone calm and familiar, reduces cortisol output and dampens amygdala activity. This effect has been observed across ages, cultures, and species. The nervous system is not designed to face threat alone. Connection is not merely comforting. It is, in a very real sense, biological medicine. The relationship between stress and memory is bidirectional and intricate. Stress generally enhances the consolidation of memories formed during or immediately after a stressful event, which is why difficult experiences tend to be remembered with unusual clarity. This is an adaptive feature. If something was demanding, the brain wants to remember it precisely to navigate it better in the future. But stress simultaneously impairs working memory, the short-term mental workspace used for reasoning, planning, and problem-solving. Under acute stress, the prefrontal cortex partially hands over control to more reactive, habit-based neural circuits. This is why stress makes it harder to think clearly, to find words, to reason through complex situations. The stressed brain is not a thinking brain in the fullest sense. It is a surviving brain, narrowly focused, hypervigilant, and deeply efficient at the one thing it believes it needs to do: get through this moment. Epigenetics, the study of how experience changes the way genes are expressed without altering the DNA sequence itself, has become one of the most active fields in stress research. Scientists have found that chronic stress leaves epigenetic marks on certain genes involved in the stress response, potentially altering how sensitively the system responds to future threats. Some of these epigenetic changes appear to be reversible with time, rest, and positive experience. Others may persist longer. Perhaps most intriguingly, some research, largely from animal studies, suggests that certain epigenetic marks associated with stress exposure may be passed to the next generation, in a process scientists are still working to understand in humans. The story of stress may be longer than a single lifetime, though how much longer remains an open and fascinating question. The prefrontal cortex, the large, forward-positioned region of the brain associated with planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation, sits in a kind of ongoing negotiation with the amygdala during stress. When the amygdala fires an alarm, the prefrontal cortex can, under the right conditions, send calming signals that contextualize the threat, weigh the evidence, and decide whether the alarm is warranted. This top-down regulation is one of the key mechanisms through which humans manage stress consciously. Therapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy work largely by strengthening this prefrontal capacity, building the neural pathways that allow reason to gently moderate fear. However, when stress becomes overwhelming or chronic, the prefrontal cortex's regulatory influence can weaken, and the amygdala's voice grows louder. One of the gifts of rest, of sleep, of stillness, of this quiet hour, is to let the prefrontal cortex recover its steadying voice. The skin is one of the most direct external reflections of the internal stress state. The skin contains its own network of stress-responsive cells, including mast cells and nerve fibers that respond to cortisol and neuropeptides. During chronic stress, skin barrier function weakens, making the skin more permeable and more reactive. Conditions such as eczema, psoriasis, and acne often worsen during periods of prolonged stress, not coincidentally, but through direct biological pathways linking the nervous system and the skin. This connection is sometimes called the brain-skin axis, and it runs in both directions. Just as inner stress manifests on the surface, gentle sensory experiences, warmth, soft touch, the weight of a blanket, can signal safety inward through the same pathways. Your skin is not separate from your nervous system. It is part of it. One of the most consistent findings in stress research is that physical movement is one of the most effective ways to metabolize the stress response. This makes evolutionary sense. The stress response prepares the body for physical action, running, climbing, moving quickly. When that physical action never comes, as is the case with most modern stressors, the mobilized energy has nowhere to go. Exercise uses that energy in the way the body intended. Beyond simple discharge, physical activity triggers the release of endorphins, endocannabinoids, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the growth and maintenance of neurons, including in the stress-sensitive hippocampus. Even moderate physical movement, a walk in the evening, gentle stretching before bed, measurably reduces cortisol levels and improves the quality of sleep that follows. The body's remedy for tension has always been motion. Breathing is the only function of the autonomic nervous system that can be consciously controlled, and this single fact carries extraordinary implications for stress. When you breathe slowly and deeply, extending the exhale beyond the inhale, you directly activate the parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, running from the brainstem down through the heart, lungs, and digestive organs, carries signals of safety from the body back to the brain. Slow, deliberate breathing is essentially sending the brain a message. The danger has passed. You can rest now. Research on slow-paced breathing, around 5 to 6 breath cycles per minute, has shown measurable reductions in cortisol, heart rate, and blood pressure, as well as increases in heart rate variability, a marker of a calm and adaptive nervous system. The breath is a lever that reaches directly into the oldest parts of the brain. By this point in our journey, a pattern is already emerging. Stress is not simply an emotion, it is a whole body event, touching the brain, the heart, the gut, the immune system, the skin, and the very way genes express themselves. It is ancient, purposeful, and in its proper form, genuinely protective. The difficulties arise not from the existence of the stress response, but from its activation in contexts that offer no resolution. Threats that cannot be outrun, fears that have no object, pressures that never lift. And woven through all of this is sleep, the single most powerful recovery mechanism the nervous system possesses. Every fact we have explored so far points toward the same truth. The body knows how to heal from stress. It simply needs the space and the stillness to do so. And that space begins right here, tonight. Let's pause here and notice your body. Right now, as you breathe out slowly, your brain is doing something you cannot see and do not need to direct. It is sorting through today, deciding what to keep, what to soften, what to quietly release. Trillions of processes are occurring in silence. Heart beating, lungs breathing, cells repairing, all without your instruction, all without your effort. Your nervous system has been working hard, and it knows, it has always known, how to come back to stillness. Notice the gentle weight of your body, the rise and fall of each breath. You are a complete system, complex, self-balancing, and already in the process of letting go. Now we continue. The vagus nerve, whose name comes from the Latin word for wandering, is perhaps the most important anatomical structure in understanding the stress recovery cycle. This single nerve connects the brainstem to nearly every major organ in the body, carrying information in both directions. Roughly 80% of vagal fibers travel upward from the body to the brain, carrying signals about the state of the heart, lungs, and gut. This means that the brain is, in large part, reading the body's signals and constructing an emotional state from them, rather than simply sending commands downward. High vagal tone, a measure of how actively and flexibly the vagus nerve is functioning, is associated with better emotional regulation, greater stress resilience, lower baseline levels of inflammation, and greater social connectedness. The vagus nerve is, in a meaningful sense, the biological infrastructure of calm. Polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges and refined over recent decades, proposes that the autonomic nervous system operates in 3 distinct states, rather than a simple 2-part on-off switch. The first is a ventral vagal state, one of safety, connection, and social engagement. This is the state associated with calm breathing, warm eye contact, the relaxed voice, the open posture. The second is a sympathetic state, mobilization for action. The third, and most ancient, is a dorsal vagal state, a deep shutdown response associated with freeze and collapse when threat feels overwhelming and inescapable. According to this framework, recovery Recovery from chronic stress involves not merely turning off the sympathetic response, but genuinely returning to the ventral vagal state, to felt safety, to connection, to the embodied sense that this moment is okay. The hormone oxytocin, long associated primarily with bonding, has emerged in recent years as a significant moderator of the stress response. When released, oxytocin dampens amygdala reactivity, reduces cortisol output, and promotes the feelings of trust and safety associated with social connection. Interestingly, oxytocin appears to be released not only in direct social contact, but in response to a wide range of experiences perceived as safe and nurturing, including certain types of music, rhythmic movement, gentle touch, and even acts of generosity. Some researchers have proposed that oxytocin acts as a direct countersignal to the stress response, a biological invitation toward connection and calm. The body, it seems, has its own pharmacology of peace, and many of the small, quiet rituals that humans use to comfort themselves may work, at least in part, through this molecular pathway. Inflammation is increasingly understood as a bridge between chronic stress and mental health. When the stress response remains chronically activated, levels of inflammatory proteins called cytokines rise in the bloodstream. These cytokines can cross the blood-brain barrier and interact with neural circuits involved in mood, motivation, and cognitive function. Researchers found that elevated inflammatory markers are consistently associated with depressive symptoms, and that reducing inflammation in some patients has a measurable effect on mood. This does not mean that depression is simply inflammation. These are complex, multi-layered conditions, but it does suggest that the biological pathways of stress and the pathways of mood share molecular territory. Inflammatory processes, when allowed to continue beyond what the body originally intended, become one of the quiet costs of living too long under pressure. The concept of allostatic load, a term developed by researchers and built upon substantially since the 1990s, refers to the cumulative cost of adapting to stress over time. Allostatic load is measured through a range of physiological markers: cortisol levels, blood pressure, waist-to-hip ratio, inflammatory proteins, and more. High allostatic load is associated with accelerated biological aging, increased disease risk, and reduced cognitive function. But allostatic load is not fixed. It accumulates with prolonged stress and insufficient recovery, and it can decrease with rest, social support, physical activity, and the gradual restoration of parasympathetic balance. The body keeps a running account of stress, and it also keeps a running account of recovery. Both are always in motion. Telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of chromosomes, often compared to the plastic tips on shoelaces, have become one of the most studied markers of biological aging in stress research. Chronic stress accelerates telomere shortening. Studies of caregivers, people living in high-stress environments, and individuals with histories of early life adversity have all found shorter average telomere length compared to lower stress groups. Shorter telomeres are associated with earlier onset of age-related diseases. However, and this is genuinely worth holding on to, research has also shown that lifestyle changes which reduce chronic stress, regular sleep, mindfulness practice, social connection, exercise, can slow telomere shortening and may support telomere maintenance in some populations. The story that stress writes in our chromosomes is not entirely unchangeable. The relationship between stress and pain is mediated by overlapping brain circuits that make the two deeply intertwined. Chronic stress lowers the threshold for pain perception, a phenomenon called stress-induced hyperalgesia. This occurs partly through changes in the way the brain processes incoming pain signals, and partly through the inflammatory pathways already discussed. People experiencing high levels of chronic stress often report increased sensitivity to physical discomfort, headaches, muscle tension, gastrointestinal unease, even in the absence of new injury or illness. The body in chronic stress is tuned more finely to signal. Conversely, pain itself is a stressor, which means chronic pain and chronic stress can form a reinforcing cycle, each one amplifying the other in ways that can become deeply entrenched. Understanding this cycle is often the first step toward beginning to unwind it. The prefrontal cortex undergoes measurable structural changes under chronic stress. Research using high-resolution brain imaging has found that prolonged exposure to elevated cortisol is associated with reduced grey matter density in the prefrontal cortex, the region most responsible for rational decision-making, emotional regulation, and the gentle suppression of reactive responses. The neurons of the prefrontal cortex, particularly in the medial prefrontal region, appear to retract their dendritic branches, the extensions through which they communicate with other neurons under prolonged stress. Importantly, animal studies have shown that these changes can be reversed with a reduction in stress and adequate rest. The brain that stress has altered is not permanently altered. The prefrontal cortex, given the right conditions, can rebuild what stress has thinned. One of the more quietly profound discoveries in stress biology concerns the role of meaning and purpose. Research by psychologist Viktor Frankl, developed further in contemporary neuroscience, suggests that the experience of meaning modulates the stress response at a neurological level. When people perceive their stressors as connected to something they value, their family, their work, their growth, the physiological signature of stress changes. Cortisol still rises, but the inflammatory response is less pronounced. The cardiovascular system responds more in the challenge pattern than the threat pattern. Recovery is faster. Purpose does not eliminate stress, but it appears to change the molecular conversation that stress initiates in the body. The sense that difficulty is meaningful may be, at the cellular level, genuinely protective. Stress hormones interact with the reproductive system in ways that reflect the body's prioritization of survival over long-term investment during threat. In both males and females, chronic stress suppresses the hormonal signals that regulate reproductive function. In females, elevated cortisol can disrupt the menstrual cycle by interfering with the pulsatile release of hormones from the hypothalamus. In males, chronic stress suppresses testosterone production and can affect sperm quality. These effects are reversible with stress reduction. The body, under persistent threat, redirects resources toward the systems most needed for immediate survival. This is not a failure. It is the logic of a nervous system that believes, with everything it has, that this is not the moment to be building a future. Sleep architecture, the precise sequence of sleep stages through a typical night, is disrupted by chronic stress in ways that compound its effects. Particularly affected is slow wave sleep, also called deep sleep, which is the phase most associated with physical restoration, immune function, and the release of growth hormone. Chronic stress tends to reduce the proportion of slow wave sleep and increase lighter, more fragmented sleep stages. It also tends to elevate nighttime cortisol levels, which can trigger premature waking in the early morning hours, a pattern familiar to many people who find themselves awake at 3 or 4 in the morning with an active, circling mind. The stressed brain resists the deepest rest precisely when it most needs it, which makes the act of lying quietly, breathing slowly, and allowing the night to do its work, an act genuine courage. The microbiome, the vast community of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and other microorganisms living primarily in the human gut, has emerged as an unexpectedly significant participant in stress regulation. Research over the past decade has established that the gut microbiome communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve, through the immune system, and through the production of neurotransmitters and neuroactive compounds. Stress alters the composition of the gut microbiome, reducing the diversity and abundance of beneficial bacterial species, and a less diverse microbiome, in turn, is associated with heightened stress reactivity and low mood. Some of the most recent research has explored the use of specific probiotic strains, sometimes called psychobiotics, in reducing markers of stress and anxiety. The gut is not a passive recipient of the brain's stress signals. It is a participant in the conversation. The concept of stress inoculation, the idea that exposure to manageable doses of stress can build long-term resilience, is supported by a growing body of neuroscientific evidence. When an organism encounters a challenging but survivable stressor and successfully copes with it, several biological changes occur. Stress response systems become better calibrated, activating more precisely when needed and recovering more rapidly afterward. The prefrontal cortex strengthens its regulatory connections to the amygdala. Levels of neuropeptide Y and other resilience-associated molecules tend to rise. This is the biological basis for the ancient intuition that difficulty, navigated well, makes people stronger. Not all stress is harmful. Stress that is appropriately sized, time-limited, and followed by adequate recovery may be one of the ingredients through which a nervous system learns that it can survive what it encounters. Mindfulness-based practices have been among the most rigorously studied non-pharmacological approaches to chronic stress, and the findings are consistent enough to have entered mainstream clinical guidelines. Regular mindfulness practice, defined broadly as intentional, non-judgmental attention to present moment experience, reduces self-reported stress, lowers cortisol levels, and decreases markers of systemic inflammation. Neuroimaging studies have found that long-term meditators show greater grey matter density in the prefrontal cortex and reduced grey matter in the amygdala compared to non-meditators. There is also evidence that mindfulness practice is associated with longer telomere length relative to controls. The mechanism is not mysterious. By repeatedly practicing the shift from reactive, ruminative thinking toward calm, present focused awareness, the brain is literally being trained. New neural pathways built towards settling, witnessing, returning to this breath. Halfway through our first phase, a larger picture is forming. Stress is not a single thing. It is a system, ancient, adaptive, and woven through every organ and every cell in the body. It responds to real threats and imagined ones. It interacts with sleep, immunity, memory, pain, aging, and the microbiome. It is shaped by meaning, by social connection, by the stories we tell ourselves about what is happening. And it is fundamentally reversible. The body's drive toward homeostasis, toward balance, toward rest, toward recovery, is at least as powerful as the drive towards stress. The pathways of calm are as real as the pathways of alarm. And right now, lying in the quiet dark, breathing slowly, listening to a gentle voice describe the science of what you carry, you are already on one of those pathways, already moving,
cell by cell, toward rest. You're still here, still listening, perhaps still awake, or perhaps drifting just at the edge. Just notice. Don't judge. Just notice where your mind is right now. We're exploring the very system that's been working so hard for you today. The thing doing the exploring right now. Strange, beautiful, and gently calming. Let's drift onward together. The social regulation of the stress response begins in infancy. Research on early attachment, the bond between infant and primary caregiver, shows that the quality of this early relationship has lasting effects on how the stress response is calibrated for the rest of life. Infants with sensitive, responsive caregivers develop more moderate stress response systems. Their cortisol levels rise appropriately in response to threat, but also recover quickly when comfort is offered. Infants exposed to early stress without adequate co-regulation show, on average, more reactive stress response systems that can persist into adulthood. This is not a fixed destiny. The nervous system remains responsive to healing relationships throughout life, but it is a reminder of how deeply the capacity for calm is learned through connection with another calm presence. The circadian rhythm, the internal biological clock governing cycles of sleep and wakefulness, is intricately connected to stress regulation. The master clock, located in the tiny region of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, coordinates not only sleep timing but also the daily rhythm of cortisol secretion, immune activity, body temperature, and metabolism. Chronic stress disrupts circadian timing, and circadian disruption, in turn, amplifies stress reactivity. Research has found that people with chronically disrupted sleep-wake cycles show elevated allostatic load, more pronounced inflammatory responses, and reduced stress resilience. Protecting circadian rhythm through consistent sleep and wake times, morning light exposure, and limiting bright light in the evening is one of the less discussed but meaningful tools for regulating the stress response. Nature exposure has emerged as one of the most consistently documented environmental moderators of stress. Studies across multiple countries and demographic groups have found that spending time in natural environments, forests, parks, coastlines, even rooms with views of trees, reduces cortisol levels, lowers blood pressure, slows heart rate, and improves mood. In Japan, a practice called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, simply walking slowly through woodland without any specific goal, has been studied extensively and shown to produce measurable reductions in stress-related hormones. The mechanisms appear to involve multiple pathways. Natural soundscapes activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and volatile organic compounds released by trees may have direct immunomodulatory effects when inhaled. The body, it seems, remembers a world it evolved within. Music is one of the few stimuli that engages virtually the entire brain simultaneously, and its effects on the stress response have been documented across clinical and experimental settings. Slow, harmonically gentle music at around 60 beats per minute, close to the resting heart rate, tends to produce parasympathetic activation, reducing cortisol, heart rate, and self-reported anxiety. Music appears to work partly through entrainment, a phenomenon where the body's rhythms synchronize to external rhythmic cues. It also activates the brain's reward circuitry, releasing dopamine and endocannabinoids, and engages the social brain, perhaps because music is processed in part through circuits originally evolved for voice recognition and social bonding.
The calm music accompanying this voice tonight is not incidental. It is part of the medicine. Rumination. The tendency to repeatedly think about the causes and consequences of stressful events without moving toward resolution is one of the key psychological mechanisms through which stress becomes chronic. Research has consistently found that the degree to which a person ruminates following a stressful event is a better predictor of their long-term distress than the severity of the event itself. Rumination keeps the stress response activated by repeatedly representing the threat to the brain's alarm systems. It is, in a sense, the stress response feeding itself. Interrupting rumination through redirecting attention to the present moment, through physical movement, through sleep, is not avoidance. It is one of the most evidence-based things a person can do to protect their nervous system from the compounding effects of ongoing mental stress. The concept of post-traumatic growth, the observation that some people experience meaningful, positive psychological change following highly stressful or difficult events, has been studied for several decades and continues to generate nuanced findings. Post-traumatic growth is not the same as resilience, and it does not mean that the difficulty was not real. Rather, it refers to a process in which the gentle dismantling of previously held assumptions about the world sometimes creates space for new, often deeper understanding of one's own strength, of relationships, of what matters. Neurobiologically, post-traumatic growth appears to involve active narrative processing of the experience, typically supported by social connection, therapeutic conversation, and the gradual restoration of a sense of safety. It is not universal, but it is real, and it is documented. Thermal regulation and stress are connected through pathways that point toward practical wisdom. Warmth activates the parasympathetic nervous system and reduces activity in the areas of the brain associated with threat detection. A warm bath taken approximately 90 minutes before sleep has been shown in multiple studies to improve sleep onset and sleep quality, partly through its effects on body temperature regulation and partly through its direct calming of the nervous system. Cold exposure, conversely, initially activates the sympathetic stress response, but is followed by a significant rebound of parasympathetic activity. The body's thermal state is a language the nervous system reads continuously. Warmth, in particular, is a signal the body has learned over millions of years to associate with safety. Gratitude practices, the deliberate, regular act of noting what one is thankful for, have been studied as stress interventions, with results that have given even skeptical researchers pause. Studies using randomized designs have found that regular gratitude journaling reduces markers of physiological stress, improves sleep quality, and shifts the balance of neural activity toward reward and affiliation circuits and away from threat detection circuits. Gratitude may work partly by shifting attentional focus away from threat-relevant information. It may also activate the brain's social reward circuitry, since gratitude typically involves imagining another person's role in one's well-being. And it may reduce rumination by occupying the same cognitive resources that rumination uses, but with a different, far less distressing content. The science of gratitude is not sentimental. It is physiological. The HPA axis, the hormonal cascade that produces cortisol during stress, has its own set of built-in regulatory brakes. One of the most important is a process called negative feedback inhibition. When cortisol levels rise high enough, the hormone binds binds to receptors in the hippocampus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland, the same structures that initiated its release, and signals them to reduce cortisol output. This feedback loop is the nervous system's built-in mechanism for ending the stress response. In healthy stress regulation, the loop functions well. In chronic stress, this feedback loop becomes less sensitive over time, a phenomenon called glucocorticoid receptor resistance. The brakes begin to tire. Understanding this is not frightening. It is simply why recovery from chronic stress is a gradual, gentle process rather than a sudden one.
Halfway through this quiet journey, the answer to what stress truly is has grown clearer with every fact. Stress is the body's language for the edge between what it can hold and what it cannot. It is ancient, purposeful, and profoundly interconnected, touching every system from the chromosomes to the gut, from the skin to the sleeping brain. And the counter-language, the language of recovery, of calm, of cellular restoration, is equally real, equally intricate, and equally available to you. Right now, as your breathing slows and the night deepens around you, that counter-language is already being spoken. Your heart rate is gently falling. Your cortisol is declining along its natural nightly arc. Your brain, even now, is beginning the quiet work of processing what the day asked of it. You are already healing. You have, in truth, been healing since the moment you lay down. The memories you trust most completely are in fact gently rewritten every time you recall them. Right now, your brain is revising today, softening some edges, deepening some colors, letting others go. This is not a flaw. This is how the nervous system makes peace with experience. Every moment of sleep is a moment the brain uses to find the shape of this day, to decide what it means, to decide what it can release. You are not carrying the day unchanged into the night. You are already transforming it. And we continue drifting. The adrenal glands are small, each about the size and weight of a grape, but they are among the most metabolically active glands in the body. Sitting atop each kidney, they produce not only cortisol and adrenaline, but also more than 50 other hormones, including aldosterone, which regulates blood pressure and fluid balance. During chronic stress, the adrenal glands are continuously stimulated. The image of small glands working without rest for months or years, producing the chemistry of sustained alertness, is somehow both clinical and quietly moving. The body is very determined to protect you, even when protection is no longer what you need. Sleep, particularly the REM phase, is the brain's primary emotional regulation laboratory. During REM sleep, the brain reactivates memories of emotionally significant events from the day, but does so in a neurochemical environment, notably low in norepinephrine, the arousal neurotransmitter most associated with fear and threat. This low norepinephrine environment appears to allow the brain to process the memory of stressful events while gently diminishing their emotional charge. People who sleep well after a stressful day tend to rate the emotional intensity of those memories as lower the following morning. Sleep is not merely rest. It is, in precise neurochemical terms, the brain's method of deciding how much weight a memory needs to carry forward. The hypothalamus, the small but extraordinary region at the base of the brain that orchestrates the stress response,
also governs hunger, thirst, body temperature, circadian rhythm, and reproductive function. It is the bridge between the brain and the body's internal world. During chronic stress, the hypothalamus receives persistent activation signals that gradually alter the balance of all the systems it governs. Appetite often shifts toward calorie-dense foods, since cortisol promotes energy storage as a hedge against future threat. Sleep timing may shift. Body temperature regulation becomes less precise. The hypothalamus, managing too many demands at once, begins to run the entire internal world with a kind of sustained vigilance. The path back to balance requires, more than anything, convincing this ancient structure that the emergency has passed. Creative thinking and stress occupy opposing positions in the brain's resource allocation system. The default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions most active during mind-wandering, daydreaming, and creative imagination, is suppressed during the stress response. When the threat detection systems are running, the brain narrows its attention, favoring specific, goal-directed processing over broad, associative thinking. This is why stress impairs creativity, and why creative inspiration so often arrives not during periods of intense effort, but in moments of rest, in the shower, on a walk, in the drowsy minutes before sleep. The relaxed brain, the wandering mind, the undirected consciousness, these are not idle states. They are the conditions under which the brain generates its most original connections. Rest is not a break from thinking. It is a different kind of thinking. There are individual differences in stress reactivity that appear to be rooted partly in genetics. Variants in genes encoding for cortisol receptors, serotonin transporters, and the enzyme that breaks down catecholamines like dopamine and adrenaline, called COMT, all contribute to how sensitively a given person's nervous system responds to stress. People with certain gene variants may have stress response systems that fire more intensely or recover more slowly. But genetics is not destiny in this domain. Environmental factors, early relationships, adult social support, physical health, sleep quality consistently moderate the effects of stress-related gene variants. Biology sets the parameters, experience shapes what happens within them. The relationship between stress and eating is mediated by cortisol's direct effects on appetite-regulating hormones and brain circuits. Cortisol increases the production of a hunger hormone called ghrelin, while also activating the brain's reward circuitry in response to calorie-dense foods. This combination creates the familiar pattern of reaching for sweet, fatty, or salty foods during difficult periods. At the same time, cortisol promotes the storage of visceral fat, fat deposited around the abdominal organs, which is itself associated with increased inflammation. Chronic stress can shift both eating behavior and the body's handling of the energy consumed. The body, under pressure, stores what it can, wherever it can, because it does not know when the pressure will end. Laughter, genuine, spontaneous laughter, produces a physiological response that is in many ways the opposite of the stress response. The muscles of the face and abdomen activate, respiration becomes irregular and deep, and the cascade of neurochemical changes follows. Endorphins are released, cortisol and adrenaline levels fall, and certain markers of immune function improve. Studies have found that anticipating laughter reduces cortisol and adrenaline even before the laughter itself occurs. The brain, simply expecting something pleasurable and safe, begins to shift its internal chemistry toward ease. Laughter, play, and lightness
are not frivolous additions to a well-lived life. They are, in measurable biological terms, part of the recovery architecture of the nervous system. Cognitive reappraisal, the deliberate reinterpretation of a stressful situation in a way that alters its emotional meaning, is one of the most well-validated emotion regulation approaches in psychology, and its neurobiological basis is increasingly well understood. When a person successfully reappraises a stressful event, not by denying its difficulty, but by finding a different frame for understanding it, activity in the prefrontal cortex increases, while amygdala activity decreases. Cortisol and cardiovascular markers of stress are measurably lower following successful reappraisal. Reappraisal is not telling oneself that the difficult thing is fine. It is more subtle than that. It is asking, what else might this mean? What is still true despite this? These are the questions that the prefrontal cortex was built to ask. Social support is one of the most robust predictors of stress resilience in the entire scientific literature. Across hundreds of studies, across cultures, across age groups, the consistent finding is that people with strong social connections show lower cortisol responses to stress, faster physiological recovery, lower allostatic load, reduced inflammation, and longer lifespan. The biological mechanism involves multiple pathways: oxytocin, vagal tone, reduced threat appraisal, but perhaps the most fundamental is simply this: the presence of another person who is calm, present, and trustworthy sends a direct signal to the nervous system that the situation is survivable. Connection does not require words. Sometimes the most powerful thing one human being can offer another is simply a steady, quiet presence that says, "You are not alone in this." The experience of awe, the emotion evoked by encountering something vast, intricate, or profoundly beautiful, has been found in recent research to have measurable anti-stress effects. People who report experiencing awe regularly show lower levels of cytokines, the inflammatory proteins associated with chronic stress. Awe appears to activate the default mode network and engage the parasympathetic nervous system. It also tends to gently reduce what researchers call the small self, the sense of one's personal worries and concerns as being of paramount importance. When something immense catches your attention, the night sky, a piece of music that reaches somewhere words cannot, the sheer unlikeliness of being alive at all, the nervous system seems to exhale. The small story of today's stress becomes, for a moment, held inside something much larger than itself. The brain's stress response can be conditioned and deconditioned in ways that parallel classical conditioning. If a particular context, a specific environment, a time of day, a set of sensory cues becomes repeatedly associated with stress, the brain begins to generate a stress response in that context, even before any actual threat appears. This is why some people experience tension simply from sitting at their desk, or entering a particular room, or hearing a particular sound. Deconditioning, breaking the association between context and stress, requires repeated exposure to the context in the absence of threat, allowing new, safety-associated memories to gradually form. Creating a bedroom that is reliably, exclusively associated with rest and safety is one of the most direct forms of stress response deconditioning available. The hormone melatonin, produced by the pineal gland in response to darkness, serves as the primary timing signal for sleep onset, but it is also a mild antioxidant and anti-inflammatory agent.
Some research suggests that melatonin has direct effects on the stress response, partly by modulating cortisol secretion through interactions with the HPA axis. Disrupting melatonin production through blue light exposure at night, irregular sleep schedules, does not only delay sleep, it may also impair the body's ability to complete its nightly stress recovery cycle. The simple act of dimming the lights as evening deepens, allowing the body's ancient chemistry to recognize the dark. This is an invitation to a biological process that has been running every night of human existence. Compassion, the emotional response of concern for another's well-being, combined with motivation to help, activates neural circuits that are distinct from the circuits activated by empathic distress. While empathic distress, vicariously feeling another's pain without any sense of what to do, activates threat detection circuits and is associated with withdrawal. Compassion activates circuits associated with affiliation and reward. Research on compassion training, structured practices that cultivate the motivation to relieve suffering, has found that it reduces cortisol, increases heart rate variability, and decreases self-reported distress, even in the face of others' suffering. Compassion, it appears, is a form of stress inoculation, protecting against the kind of helplessness that overwhelms the nervous system, while deepening the sense of meaning that sustains it. Physical touch in particular, the slow, gentle, stroking touch associated with affectionate contact, activates a specialized class of sensory nerve fibers called C-tactile afferents, which are present in the skin across the body and are specifically tuned to the speed and pressure of gentle social touch. These fibers communicate directly with the brain regions involved in social bonding and reward, and their activation reliably reduces cortisol, lowers heart rate, and activates the oxytocin system. The research on therapeutic touch and gentle physical contact consistently shows stress-reducing effects. The nervous system responds to gentle touch with a kind of cellular recognition, as if the body remembers, in its oldest language, what it means to be held. Noise pollution, persistent exposure to unwanted sound, particularly low-frequency mechanical noise from traffic, aircraft, and construction, has been established as a genuine physiological stressor. The World Health Organization has identified environmental noise as the second largest environmental health risk in Europe after air pollution. Prolonged exposure to nighttime noise elevates cortisol, disrupts sleep architecture, increases blood pressure, and raises cardiovascular risk. The auditory system, unlike the visual system, has no equivalent of closing the eyes. The ears remain partially alert even during sleep, monitoring the acoustic environment for signals of danger. Creating a quiet sleep environment directly reduces this form of background stress loading and protects the nervous system's ability to complete its nightly repair cycle. The nervous system relaxes in a very literal way when the world around it grows quiet. Chronic loneliness is one of the most potent and underappreciated stresses in contemporary life. Research has established that subjective loneliness, the feeling of being socially disconnected, regardless of objective social contact, is associated with elevated cortisol, increased inflammatory markers, disrupted sleep architecture, and accelerated biological aging. The nervous system appears to interpret persistent social disconnection as a threat, which, for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, it genuinely was. Loneliness heightens threat vigilance, making the world appear more challenging and connection harder to sustain. The antidote is not simply more social contact, but the gradual, patient rebuilding of felt safety with other people, often beginning with one trusted presence, one honest conversation, one small act of reaching out. Self-compassion, treating oneself with the same warmth and understanding one would offer a good friend in difficulty, has been identified in research as a significant moderator of the stress response. Studies have found that self-compassionate people show lower cortisol reactivity to stressful events, lower self-reported anxiety, and more adaptive coping compared to those high in self-criticism. The mechanism appears to involve the same oxytocin and vagal pathways activated by received compassion from others. In other words, the calming, regulating effect of a caring presence can, to a meaningful degree, be self-generated. This suggests that the way a person relates to their own difficulty, the tone of the inner voice in hard moments, is itself a biological variable in the stress response. Gentleness toward oneself is not weakness. It is physiological. The phenomenon of vicarious stress, stress experienced through witnessing or imagining the stress of others, is well documented and increasingly studied in the context of media consumption. Watching distressing news content activates the stress response, even when the events depicted are distant and pose no direct threat. Research following major news events has found elevated cortisol and anxiety in heavy news consumers compared to those who limit exposure. This is not an argument against awareness or empathy. It is a recognition that the nervous system's threat detection circuitry evolved in a context where encountered challenges were personal, local, and actionable, not global, continuous, and largely outside one's influence. Managing media exposure, particularly in the hours before sleep, is one of the most direct forms of cortisol management available in modern life. The experience of flow, the state of deep, effortless engagement described by psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, appears to be one of the most effective natural stress recovery states available to human beings. During flow, the default mode network quiets, self-referential thought recedes, and the brain enters a state of absorbed focus. Cortisol levels have been found to be low during and after flow states, and the subjective experience is consistently reported as one of the most satisfying in human life. Flow requires a balance between the challenge of a task and one's current skill level. Too easy and attention wanders. Too difficult and tension intrudes. Activities that reliably produce flow, whether music, sport, craft, or many others, are not merely hobbies. They are recovery systems for the stressed nervous system. The skin's microbiome, the community of microorganisms living on the skin's surface, is sensitive to psychological stress in ways that mirror the gut microbiome's stress responses. Elevated cortisol during chronic stress alters the composition of skin microbiota, reduces the skin's natural antimicrobial defenses, and increases permeability. These changes can trigger or worsen inflammatory skin conditions. But the skin's microbiome also communicates with the immune system and, indirectly, with the brain through immune and neural pathways. Some early research suggests that the health of the skin microbiome may influence mood and stress reactivity, adding another layer to the story of how the body's surfaces and its inner landscape speak to each other. The body, from its outermost edge to its deepest interior, is listening to itself continuously. Positive affect, the experience of positive emotions, not as the absence of negative ones, but as genuinely distinct states, has been found in research to broaden attentional scope, increase cognitive flexibility, and actively counteract the physiological effects of stress. Research suggests that positive emotions generate an undoing effect on the cardiovascular activations of stress. In experimental studies, people who experience a brief positive emotion following a stressor show faster cardiovascular recovery than controls. Even a small, genuine positive experience, a moment of beauty, of connection, of interest, of calm pleasure, is not merely pleasant. It is actively participating in the physiological recovery from stress. The body uses every opportunity the nervous system gives it to find its way back to ease. The role of meaning-making in stress recovery has been studied across a wide range of contexts: illness, loss, and the more diffuse stress of ordinary life. Research consistently finds that people who are able to find or construct meaning from their stressful experiences show faster physiological recovery, better immune function, and greater well-being over time. Meaning-making does not require that the stressful experience be interpreted as good or deserved. It simply involves the gradual integration of the experience into one's larger understanding of life. The quiet work of placing what happened inside a story of who one is and what one's life is about. This is work the sleeping brain often does on its own, weaving the day's difficult moments into a slightly larger context. Sleep, in this sense, is a meaning-making process. Exercise's effects on the brain extend well beyond cortisol reduction. Physical activity increases the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the growth, maintenance, and protection of neurons throughout the brain, and is particularly important for the hippocampus, the stress-sensitive memory region that chronic stress can diminish. Studies have found that regular aerobic exercise can support hippocampal volume, improve memory and learning, and reduce symptoms of anxiety and low mood. The dose needed to produce these effects is not extreme. 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise most days produces measurable brain benefits. The path toward a more resilient, less stress-reactive brain is not a new compound. In many cases, it is simply movement, the original medicine. The act of writing expressively about stressful experiences, a practice studied extensively in psychology since the 1980s, has been found in dozens of studies to reduce physiological markers of stress and improve health outcomes. Writing for 15 to 20 minutes on 3 or 4 consecutive days about the emotions and thoughts surrounding a stressful event appears to engage the prefrontal cortex in a way that promotes cognitive reappraisal and emotional processing. People who write expressively about stress show reductions in physician visits, improvements in immune function, lower cortisol, and better sleep in the weeks following the writing. The effect is not about venting, it is about meaning-making. Translating raw emotional experience into language appears to help the brain integrate what it has encountered, converting unresolved stress into something that can finally be released. By now, the arc of our journey is clear. Stress is a biological reality, ancient, purposeful, and woven into every system of the human body. But the science of stress is inseparable from the science of recovery. Every finding about how stress affects the body is accompanied in the research literature by findings about how the body repairs. Sleep repairs what cortisol erodes. Exercise rebuilds what chronic tension diminishes. Connection counteracts what isolation amplifies. Meaning transforms what raw experience leaves unresolved. The body is not passively affected by stress. It is actively recovering from it at every moment. And most powerfully, most essentially, most necessarily during sleep. The night is not a pause between the difficult days. The night is when the real work happens. And that work is already underway right now, in this quiet, in this breath, in this gentle, faithful body. Sleep does not come when you try to sleep. It comes when you stop trying. This is not a metaphor. It is the biology of the nervous system, which reads effort as alertness and stillness as permission. Right now, your body is looking for the signal that it is safe to let go. You don't need to do anything to give that signal. You are already giving it. The breath you're taking right now, the weight of your body settling, the absence of effort. This is it. This is the signal. You don't need to hold on to anything from today. We're almost there now. Your nervous system has been watching over you for your entire life. Every alarm it ever sounded was an attempt to protect you. Every surge of cortisol was the body's way of saying, I see you and I am trying to keep you safe. Even when that protection was more than you needed, the intention was always care. Tonight, you can offer your nervous system something it rarely receives. The message that the watch is no longer necessary, that it has done its work, that it can rest. The parasympathetic nervous system, the system of rest, restoration, and repair, is not a lesser state than the sympathetic system. It is not a pause from life. It is life in a different register, slower, deeper, quieter, and in many ways richer. The heart still beats, the lungs still breathe, but the rhythm has changed. The urgency has faded, and in that softened state, the body does things it cannot do when on guard. It repairs, it consolidates, it grows, it heals. Cortisol follows a gentle, natural curve across every 24 hours. Even in a life with stress, cortisol falls each night as darkness deepens. It reaches its lowest point in the earliest hours of sleep before beginning its long, quiet climb toward morning. Right now, somewhere in your bloodstream, cortisol is on its descending arc. The curve is doing what it was designed to do. Your body is cooperating with the night in the way bodies have cooperated with the night for as long as there have been nights and bodies to move through them. The hippocampus, that stress-sensitive memory region we return to so many times tonight, is also one of the only structures in the adult human brain that generates entirely new neurons across the lifespan, a process called neurogenesis. Sleep promotes hippocampal neurogenesis. Exercise promotes it. Reduced cortisol promotes it. Meaning and connection promote it. The brain that stress has worn is not a fixed, diminished thing. It is a living, regenerative structure that is, even now, finding ways to grow. Somewhere in the quiet of your sleeping brain, new cells are learning to listen. Slow breathing, extending the exhale to be longer than the inhale, shifts the balance of the nervous system toward calm with every single breath. You do not have to do anything complex or difficult to access this ancient calming mechanism. You only have to breathe out slowly and let the inhale come on its own. Each exhale is a small, direct message sent through the vagus nerve to the brainstem. The world is safe enough right now. The threat has passed. You can rest. The body's temperature falls during sleep, and this cooling is part of what makes deep sleep possible. The hands and feet warm as blood moves to the skin's surface, radiating heat outward. The core cools, the brain temperature falls, and in this cooled, quiet darkness, the neurons settle into the slow, synchronous rhythms of deep sleep, the waves that carry the day's residue out to sea. A cool room supports this process. A warm bed supports the peripheral warming that initiates it. The night has a biology, and the body already knows how to follow it. The glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance network, named for the glial cells that support it, operates most actively during sleep. In animal studies, the spaces between brain cells expanded by roughly 60% during sleep, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow more freely and carry away metabolic waste products that accumulate during active thought. Recent human research, including imaging studies from 2024 and 2025, has confirmed that this clearance system is real and active in the human brain, enhancing the removal of proteins, including amyloid beta, during sleep. Sleep is not merely rest for the brain, it is the brain quietly cleaning itself. Every hour of deep sleep is a contribution to the brain's long-term health. There is a quality of attention that emerges in the hypnagogic state, the transitional zone between wakefulness and sleep, that is unlike any other state of consciousness. The edges of thought soften, images appear without being summoned. Connections form between things that waking logic would never bring together. Many creative insights have been reported in this state by scientists and artists throughout history. The associative looseness of the hypnagogic mind, briefly freed from the constraints of directed thought, finding answers that effort could not reach. You are approaching that threshold now. There is no need to hold on to wakefulness. The threshold is not a loss. It is an opening. Growth hormone, essential for cellular repair, muscle maintenance, and immune function, is released primarily during the first deep sleep cycle of the night, in the hours just after falling asleep. This release is suppressed by elevated cortisol, which means that the quality of your early sleep has direct consequences for the body's capacity to repair the physical effects of stress. To sleep well is to give the body the hormonal conditions it needs to restore what the day has asked of it. Every night of deep sleep is a gift to every cell that the day has asked to keep going. Memory consolidation during sleep is selective. The sleeping brain does not simply record the day in full, it chooses. It strengthens memories linked to emotion and meaning and allows others to fade. It finds patterns across experiences that waking thought might miss, and it gradually reduces the emotional intensity of memories that were stressful, making them more manageable, more integrated, more like stories, and less like wounds. The sleeping brain is not passive. It is editing, composing from the raw material of experience, something closer to wisdom. Your body has already been through thousands of nights, through illness and grief, through stress and uncertainty, through every difficulty that has ever arrived and somehow passed. Each of those nights, your nervous system did what it knew how to do. Each morning, something in you rose again. The pattern is ancient. The pattern is reliable. The night always ends. The body always knows, somewhere beneath the noise, how to find its way back to rest. There are cells in the heart, in addition to neurons, that can sense and respond to emotional states. The heart communicates with the brain through afferent nerve pathways, sending more signals upward than it receives downward. High heart rate variability, the subtle beat-to-beat variation in the heart's rhythm that reflects a flexible, responsive nervous system, is associated with calm, connection, and good health. Low heart rate variability is associated with chronic stress. Right now, as your breathing slows, your heart rate variability is gently rising. The heart is beginning to speak in the language of ease. The silence of a quiet room at night is not empty. It is full of the sound of your own body, the faint rhythm of the heart, the soft movement of air, the occasional settling sounds of a house at rest. These sounds, when heard in safety, are among the most deeply calming available to the nervous system. They are the sounds of being alive without urgency, the sounds of a body that is here and whole and resting. You can allow yourself to hear them now. The quiet is not something to fill. It is something to receive. Stress, in the end, is the body's response to the gap between what is and what it believes needs to be. The widening of that gap triggers the response. The narrowing of that gap through resolution, acceptance, rest, or simply the passage of time allows the response to subside. Tonight, the gap can narrow just a little, not because the circumstances of your life have changed, but because this moment, this quiet, this breath is enough. Not everything, but enough. Every system in the body that stress activates has a corresponding recovery system. Every hormone that stress releases has a hormone that quiets it. Every neural pathway that stress sensitizes has a pathway that soothes it. This is not an accident of biology, it is the design. The body was not built only to endure, it was built to recover. And recovery, real, cellular, molecular, neurological recovery, is happening right now. Not because you are doing anything, because you have finally, for this hour, stopped. The sounds of rain and running water have a specific effect on the nervous system that crosses cultures and has been observed in imaging studies of the brain. Natural water sounds activate the default mode network and reduce activity in the regions most associated with self-referential worry and rumination. The brain, hearing water, may interpret the sound as a signal of safety and abundance. The tension held in the body's listening posture gently loosens. What the ancient nervous system recognizes as safety, it allows the body to enter. Compassion fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from sustained exposure to others' suffering, is itself a form of chronic stress, with measurable effects on cortisol, immune function, and sleep. It arises not from caring too much, but from caring without adequate self-restoration. The remedy is not to care less, it is to rest more, to refill what empathy is given away, to remember that the nervous system that holds others' pain also needs to be held. Tonight, whatever you have given today, you are allowed to receive rest in return. The brain's pain modulation system, including the release of endogenous opioids and endocannabinoids during sleep and during positive emotional states, provides a natural counterbalance to stress-induced pain sensitivity. Good sleep reduces pain thresholds. Positive emotions reduce pain thresholds. Social connection reduces pain thresholds. The body has multiple overlapping systems for reducing its own discomfort. They all require something from you that you are doing right now. They require stillness. They require the space of the night. They require the simple, faithful act of allowing the body to do what it knows how to do. The future self, the person you'll be tomorrow, next week, next year, is being shaped right now by the quality of this night's rest. The neurons consolidating tonight's memories. The hippocampus repairing what cortisol has asked of it. The prefrontal cortex rebuilding the regulatory connections that will help tomorrow's decisions be a little clearer. The immune system strengthening the defenses that will protect tomorrow's body. Everything you invest in tonight's sleep is a quiet gift to every version of yourself that follows. This night is not separate from the life you are building. It is one of the foundations of it. The Science of Stress, fully told, is a story about the body's extraordinary effort to protect a life it finds worth protecting. Every alarm, every hormone, every tension and every ache, all of it, the language of a system that refused to give up on you. You can honor that effort tonight by offering what it has always been working toward: rest, safety, the signal at last that the watch is over. The difficult day has passed, and what remains in the quiet of this room, in the softening weight of this body, is simply the deep, ancient, biological fact of being alive. And so our quiet journey through the science of stress comes to a gentle close. We've travelled from the first fire of the amygdala, that ancient, faithful guardian, to the soft chemical arc of cortisol descending through the night. We've wandered through the hippocampus, that seahorse-shaped keeper of memory and recovery. We've visited the gut, the heart, the skin, and the sleeping brain. From the body's oldest survival chemistry to the extraordinary neuroplasticity of a mind that can be rebuilt by rest, we've glimpsed how stress is both the weight we carry and the pressure that sometimes shapes us into something stronger. The arc of our journey has been from alarm toward ease, and you followed it all the way here to this quiet place at the edge of sleep. Stress reminds us that we are alive enough to care about what happens to us. Much of the quiet work of recovery happens in darkness, in the cells, in the sleeping neurons, in the breath that asks for nothing. The body, in its deepest wisdom, does not require perfection. It requires only enough rest, enough connection, enough stillness to remember what it already knows. By pausing to notice, by lying here in the quiet, you have already offered your nervous system something it has been waiting for all day. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about unity, about the fact that every person who has ever felt the weight of stress, every person lying in the dark tonight with a mind that needed quieting, every tired, careful, feeling human being, all of us are moving through the same biology, the same ancient system, the same nightly arc of cortisol descending, of neurons settling, of the body turning toward rest. You are not alone in this. Let your entire being dissolve into the slow, patient rhythm of recovery, into the breath of a body that has been trying all day to bring you safely here. Prepare for deep sleep, no boundaries left between effort and release. peace. If this gentle exploration of the science of stress helped quiet something in you tonight, a gentle like, subscribe, or sharing this with someone else who carries a heavy day might be exactly what another tired mind needs to find their way here. One quiet tap, one peaceful night at a time. But there's no need to do anything now. Nothing at all. The stress response is still unfolding somewhere in the world, without your effort, without your witness. You don't need to hold any of this. It was never yours to carry into sleep. You've travelled inward tonight, through corridors most people never pause to notice. You touched the architecture of something that has been working hard on your behalf for a very long time. You can allow these thoughts of stress and recovery to fade now, like the last image of a dream at dawn, present, then softer, then simply part of everything, leaving only the quiet, unheld calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if all you've carried today is being sorted by careful, invisible hands and is simply setting itself down. If sleep comes, let it carry you the way consolidation does, not with force, but with quiet intention, into a realm where time and weight no longer matter. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, your nervous system will still be there, still tending, still regulating, still learning how to carry you more lightly, still becoming. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, gentle explorer. And remember, your body has been trying to bring you home all day.